A rookie nurse, a corrupt CEO, a patient's life on the line. He thought he could fire her for saving a man's life. He didn't know he was firing a decorated combat medic. Then the Pentagon called. Now, let me take you inside the longest 90 minutes of a hospital CEO's life. The air in St. Jude's General Hospital had a specific weight to it, a layered scent of industrial-grade bleach, stale coffee, and the faint sweet odor of decay that clung to the oldest parts of the building. For Lena Petrova, it was the smell of a new beginning, a life scrubbed clean of its past. She moved through the corridors with a quiet efficiency that was often mistaken for timidity. Her uniform was always immaculate, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun, and her face, often pale under the humming fluorescent lights, was a mask of placid neutrality. She was a rookie. That was the word that followed her, whispered by senior nurses and muttered by overworked residents. The rookie, fresh out of nursing school, they assumed, with a head full of textbook procedures and a heart full of naive intentions. She never corrected them. She let the label settle over her like a second skin, a layer of camouflage that felt more familiar than the starched white fabric of her scrubs. Camouflage was a language she understood far better than the passive-aggressive politics of a civilian hospital. Her days were a study in observation. She saw the minute tells of her colleagues, the slight tremor in Nurse Miller's hand as she poured medications after a grueling 12-hour shift, the forced brightness in Dr. Chen's eyes as he juggled an impossible patient load. She saw the hospital itself, the hairline cracks in the linoleum, the persistent flicker of the lights in the West Wing, the subtle but undeniable downgrade in the quality of supplies. The gauze was coarser, the tape less adhesive, the gloves thinner, tearing more easily. These were the fingerprints of Mr. Alistair Finch. She had never met the hospital's CEO, but his presence was an oppressive force. His professionally photographed portrait hung in the main lobby, a study in curated power. He smiled like a man of God, all perfect teeth and benevolent eyes, but the whispers in the break room painted a different picture. A man of numbers, they said. A man who saw patients as entries on a balance sheet and staff as acceptable losses. Under his leadership, St. Jude's had become profitable for the first time in a decade, a fact he touted in every local news interview. But Lena, who had been trained to assess battlefields, saw the cost of that profit in the tired faces of her co-workers and the fraying edges of their resources. She did her job. She checked vitals, administered meds, changed dressings, and charted with meticulous precision. Her handwriting was a small, neat block script, devoid of flourish. Her movements were economical, wasting no energy. When a patient was in pain, her voice was a low, steady murmur that cut through the fog of their discomfort. She was good at her job. She knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with ego, that she was better than good. But she was careful never to let the full extent of her competence show. It was a light she kept shielded, dimmed to a pilot light of simple, rookie-level proficiency. The past was a locked room, and she had no intention of opening the door. "Petrova, bed 4 needs a new IV bag," a charge nurse called out, not bothering to look up from her computer. "On it," Lena replied, her voice even. She walked to the supply closet, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. The closet was a mess, a testament to rushed shifts and low morale. Boxes were torn open, supplies jumbled together. She scanned the shelves for the correct saline solution. Not there. She checked again. The specific concentration the doctor had ordered was out, There was a cheaper alternative, one with a slightly different electrolyte balance. Protocol dictated she find the charge nurse, report the shortage, and wait for a physician to approve the substitute. It was a process that could take 20 minutes on a good day. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. She could hear the patient in bed coughing, a wet, rattling sound. She glanced at his chart. Congestive heart failure. The fluid balance was critical. 20 minutes was a luxury he might not have. Her shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. For a fraction of a second, the fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor bled away, replaced by the searing sun of a Kandahar airfield. The smell of bleach became the smell of dust and aviation fuel. The beeping of a distant heart monitor became the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades. Improvise. Adapt. Overcome, the mantra echoed in the silent corners of her mind, a ghost from her other life. She took a deep breath, the hospital air filling her lungs again, pushing the ghost back into its box. She grabbed the alternative solution and a vial of sterile water. She knew the precise calculation to dilute the solution to the correct specifications. It was a field expediency, a trick she had learned in a place where supply closets were whatever you could carry on your back. It was also a flagrant violation of St. Jude's policy. She paused, the cool glass of the vial in her hand. For 2 years she had followed the rules. For 2 years she had been the ghost, the rookie, the quiet girl who just wanted to be left alone. It was safe. It was simple. The patient coughed again, a desperate, strangled sound. Safety was a luxury. Simplicity was an illusion. She moved. She didn't think. She worked with the swift, sure-handed grace of a bomb technician, her actions precise and automatic. In 90 seconds, she had the correctly balanced IV bag ready. She walked into the patient's room, her face once again a mask of calm professionalism. "Just changing your drip, Mr. Henderson," she said softly. The old man in the bed looked at her with watery, fearful eyes. "It feels tight," he rasped, gesturing to his chest. Lena's gaze swept over him, a rapid, comprehensive assessment, skin clammy and pale, a faint blue tinge to his lips, respiration shallow. Her fingers went to his wrist, finding a pulse that was thready and erratic. This was more than a fluid imbalance. This was a prelude. "Just relax for me," she said, her voice dropping into a lower, more commanding register. It was the voice she used when the bullets were flying, the voice that promised survival. She hit the code blue button on the wall next to the bed, the alarm blaring through the ward. And then all hell broke loose. The code team burst into the room, a chaotic swarm of blue scrubs. A young resident, Dr. Miles, took the lead, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "What do we have?" 76-year-old male, history of CHF, went into V-fib, Lena reported, her voice cutting through the noise. She was already starting chest compressions, her arms straight, her body a perfect piston. The rhythm was flawless, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. "Get the paddles on him," Miles shouted. A nurse fumbled with the defibrillator, rolling the hulking machine to the bedside. "Charging to 200, Lena continued compressions, her eyes never leaving the patient's face. She saw the subtle slackening of his jaw, the slight dilation of his pupils. They were losing him. "Clear," the nurse yelled. The patient's body jerked on the bed, a grotesque spasm. The monitor blipped, then flatlined again. "No change! Going again! Charging to 300! "Push one of epi," Dr. Miles commanded. Another nurse scrambled for the crash cart drawer. "We're out of epinephrine," she cried, her voice high with panic. "The pre-filled syringes are gone," Dr. Miles swore, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean we're out? Check again." "I'm telling you, it's not here." It was the cost-cutting. Lena knew it instantly. The more expensive pre-filled epinephrine syringes had likely been replaced by cheaper multi-dose vials that had to be drawn up manually, a process that took precious seconds. Seconds they did not have. Finch's profit margin was about to kill this man. Lena didn't stop compressions. "There are vials of adrenaline in the second drawer, left side," she said, her voice sharp, authoritative. 1 milligram in 10 milliliters of saline. Get it now." The nurse stared at her. Dr. Miles stared at her. Who was this rookie giving orders? "Now!" Lena's voice was a whip crack. It was the voice of a captain, not a subordinate. The nurse, startled into action, yanked open the drawer and found the vials exactly where Lena had said they would be. "Paddles!" Miles yelled again, trying to regain control. "Charging to 360. "It's not charging!" the defibrillator nurse shouted in frustration. "The battery is dead. Someone plug it in." Chaos. A cascade of failures, each one a link in a chain forged by Finch's greed. The defibrillator had a faulty battery because a new one was deemed an unnecessary expense. The life-saving drug was unavailable in its most effective form because the cheaper version looked better on a spreadsheet. Lena never faltered in her rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But she saw the path they were on. She saw the end of it. The patient's skin was turning a dusky gray. She made a decision. It wasn't a choice, not really. It was an activation. The rookie nurse persona dissolved, burned away by the acid of necessity. "Stop," she said. The word was not loud, but it sliced through the panic. Everyone froze, looking at her. Even Dr. Miles, his mouth half open to shout another order, fell silent. "The compressions are ineffective against the fibrillation," she stated, her tone clinical, detached. "We need to reset the rhythm, and we need to do it now. Precordial thump." Dr. Miles blinked. That's an outdated procedure. It's not recommended." "It's recommended when your $5,000 machine is a paperweight and your patient is dying," Lena countered, her eyes like chips of ice. "Do you have a better idea, doctor?" The challenge hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Miles, young, overwhelmed, and faced with a cascade of equipment failures he couldn't control, looked from the flat line on the monitor to Lena's unnervingly calm face. He saw no fear in her, no panic, only a terrifying certainty. He swallowed hard. "Do it." Lena didn't hesitate. She repositioned herself, measured the distance with her eye, the lower half of the sternum. She made a fist. She brought it down, hard, a single, controlled strike from a height of about 12 inches. It wasn't an act of violence, but of pure, calculated physics. The sound was a dull, fleshy thud. On the monitor, the flat line jagged. A single, beautiful spike. Then another. A slow, ragged sinus rhythm appeared on the screen. A collective gasp went through the room. "We have a pulse," a nurse whispered, her fingers on the patient's carotid artery. "It's weak, but it's there." Lena straightened up, her face impassive. She stepped back, melting into the background as the team, galvanized by the sudden reversal of fortune, found their footing. The adrenaline was administered. The defibrillator was finally plugged in and placed on standby. Dr. Miles, his confidence returning, began calling out orders for stabilizing medications. The crisis was over. Mr. Henderson was alive. Lena faded back toward the door, her work done. She felt the familiar post-adrenaline coldness seep into her limbs. Her hands were perfectly steady, but inside, a storm was raging. She had broken protocol. She had overridden a doctor. She had used a technique that was practically forbidden. She had revealed a glimpse of the person she had tried so hard to bury. The charge nurse caught her arm as she stepped into the hallway. Her face was a mixture of awe and terror. "I have to report this, Lena. All of it. The IV, the thump, everything." "I know," Lena said quietly. She knew what was coming. It was as inevitable as the sunrise. She had saved a life, but she had also signed her own termination papers, and she had made a very powerful enemy. The ripples from her actions wouldn't just stop at the charge nurse's desk. They would travel all the way to the top floor, to the polished mahogany desk of Alistair Finch. And Finch was a man who did not tolerate complications. The summons came less than an hour later. It wasn't a polite request from Human Resources. It was a curt, two-word message delivered by one of the hospital's security guards. "Finch wants you." The guard, a burly man named Dave, whose usual expression was one of bored indifference, looked at her with something approaching pity. Everyone on the floor had heard what happened. The story of the rookie nurse who brought a man back from the dead with a punch to the chest was already becoming legend. But they also knew the laws of this place. Legends didn't last long when they threatened the bottom line. Lena nodded, her face betraying nothing. She followed the guard, her steps measured and even. The walk to the executive suite was a journey through another country. The floors changed from worn linoleum to plush, sound-dampening carpet. The smell of bleach and sickness gave way to the scent of leather and expensive air freshener. The art on the walls shifted from generic pastoral prints to abstract canvases that screamed of money. This was the world Finch had built for himself, a sterile, opulent bubble floating high above the grit and reality of the hospital he commanded. The secretary, a woman with a helmet of perfect hair and a strained smile, looked up as they approached. "Mr. Finch is waiting." Her eyes flickered to Lena for a moment, a brief, fleeting expression of sympathy before the professional mask snapped back into place. The guard opened one of the towering double doors and gestured for Lena to enter. She stepped inside. The office was vast, dominated by a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the city. Alistair Finch stood with his back to her, looking out at his kingdom. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than Lena made in a month. He didn't turn around for a full 30 seconds, a calculated power play designed to intimidate. Lena simply stood, her hands loosely at her sides, and waited. She had been interrogated by men far more terrifying than this corporate peacock. She knew the value of silence. Finally, he turned. His face was exactly as it was at the portrait, handsome, tanned, with a smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Miss Petrova," his voice was smooth as expensive whiskey. "The rookie nurse who plays doctor." Lena said nothing. She met his gaze without flinching. "I've read the report," he continued, strolling over to his massive desk. He picked up a single sheet of paper, holding it between two fingers as if it were contaminated. A rather dramatic account performing an unauthorized procedure, countermanding a physician's authority, using a technique that has been all but banned by every major medical association for its risks. He dropped the paper on his desk. "Tell me, Miss Petrova, where exactly in your nursing school curriculum did they teach you to punch patients in the chest?" His tone was mocking, dripping with condescension. He was enjoying this, the humiliation of a subordinate. The patient was in ventricular fibrillation, Lena stated, her voice flat and factual. The defibrillator was non-functional due to a dead battery. There were no pre-filled epinephrine syringes in the crash cart. Without immediate intervention to restore cardiac rhythm, the patient would have died. Finch's smile tightened. She had not only failed to be intimidated, she had calmly listed the very failures he was responsible for. She had turned his attack back on him. His eyes hardened. Failures of equipment and inventory are matters for the administration to handle, he said, his voice losing some of its smoothness. They are not an excuse for a rank amateur to engage in reckless, headline-grabbing theatrics. You endangered that patient. The liability you have exposed this hospital to is staggering. I saved his life, Lena said. It was a simple statement of fact. You got lucky, Finch snapped, his voice rising. He took a step toward her, his face losing its mask of detached superiority and revealing the raw anger beneath. He was a man who was used to control, and she had created a situation he could not control. You think this is some television drama? You think you're a hero? You're a liability, a first-year nurse with a god complex. He was closing in, invading her personal space, using his height and physical presence to loom over her. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Lena didn't move, didn't even breathe faster. Her body remained relaxed, but her mind was a razor. She catalogued his posture, the tension in his shoulders, the slight flush on his neck. He was losing his composure. Good. The patient's name is Arthur Henderson, Finch continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. He is a man of some influence. What do you think he will do when our legal team explains to him that a rogue nurse performed a barbaric, unapproved procedure on him that could have shattered his sternum and killed him instantly? A cage of her own paranoia. That's what he was building around her. He was twisting her life-saving act into a criminal one. That's not what happened, Lena said calmly. It's what I say happened, Finch retorted, a smirk playing on his lips. He was back in control. It's what the official report will say. It will say that you panicked, that you overstepped, and that you were immediately terminated for gross negligence. Your nursing career will be over before it even began. You will be lucky to avoid a lawsuit that will follow you for the rest of your life. He leaned back, satisfied. He had laid out her doom, and he watched her, expecting to see her crumble. He expected tears, pleading, begging. He got nothing. Lena's expression remained unchanged. Her blue eyes were fixed on his, and for the first time, Finch felt a flicker of unease. There was something behind that placid gaze, something old and hard that he couldn't identify. It was like looking at a still lake and sensing a leviathan moving in the depths. "Are you finished?" she asked. The question was so quiet, so devoid of emotion, that it was more unsettling than any shout would have been. Finch was taken aback. "Finished? I'm just getting started. You're fired, Miss Petrova, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. You will not speak to any other staff members. You will turn in your ID and your locker key. Is that clear?" "Perfectly," Lena said. He had expected a fight, or at least a whimper. Her serene acceptance was infuriating. It felt as if he hadn't won, even though he held all the cards. "Dave," Finch barked toward the door, "get her out of here." The security guard, who had been waiting just outside, entered the room. He looked at Lena, then at Finch, his expression unreadable. "This way, miss," Dave said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Lena turned to leave without another word. She had lost. She had been humiliated and fired. Her quiet new life was in ruins. Her career was likely over. A cold, familiar emptiness settled in her chest. She had seen this before. Good people being crushed by corrupt systems. Good intentions paving a road to ruin. She should have just let the man die. The thought was ugly, a venomous snake in her mind, and she crushed it instantly. Number. She had made the right call. The cost was just higher than she had anticipated. She walked out of the office, Dave the security guard a step behind her. The secretary wouldn't meet her eyes. The journey back down felt longer, a walk of shame past the trappings of power she had dared to challenge. They reached the main floor, the sounds and smells of the real hospital rushing back in. Her locker was in the basement. They would go there. She would collect her few personal items, a worn paperback, a spare pair of shoes, a photo she never looked at, and then she would be escorted out the back door like a trespasser. As they passed the entrance to the intensive care unit, a man in a dark, conservative suit stepped out of one of the private rooms. He wasn't a doctor or a nurse. His posture was ramrod straight. His hair was cut short and neat, and his face was carved from granite. He moved with an economy of motion that Lena recognized instantly. It was the way a predator moved, or a soldier. He was on the phone, his voice a low, concerned murmur. He was visiting a patient, Arthur Henderson's room. The man's eyes, a piercing gray, swept the hallway and landed on the small procession. Lena, in her pristine white scrubs, and the uniformed security guard trailing her like a prison escort. His gaze lingered on Lena for a moment. There was no recognition, just a soldier's automatic assessment of his surroundings. This was it. A fleeting chance. A 1-in-a-million shot. She had to create the signal. As Dave the guard gently tried to steer her toward the stairwell, Lena stopped. She turned to him, her expression still neutral, but she pitched her voice just loud enough for the man in the suit to overhear. "I understand," she said, her words clear and precise. "I complied with the directive. I will surrender my credentials as ordered." It was the phrasing, the specific, sterile, military jargon. Complied with the directive. Not, "I'll do what you say." Not, "Okay, I get it." It was the language of a formal debriefing, a language they both knew. The man in the suit froze. His phone conversation stopped mid-sentence. His head turned slowly, his gray eyes locking onto Lena with a sudden, searing intensity. The casual assessment was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, profound recognition. It wasn't her face he recognized. It was her language, her cadence, her discipline under duress. His eyes narrowed. A switch had been flipped. He ended his call without a goodbye, the phone disappearing into his pocket in a single, fluid motion. He took 2 long, purposeful strides that closed the distance between them. Dave the guard, seeing the well-dressed stranger approaching, tensed up. "Sir, this is a staff matter. I have to ask you to step back." The man ignored him completely. His focus was entirely on Lena. He stood before her, a tower of quiet, coiled authority. He was taller than Finch, but his presence was different. Finch's power was borrowed, a costume he wore. This man's power was innate, forged in crucibles Lena knew all too well. "State your name and designation," the man said. His voice was a low baritone, a command, not a request. Before Lena could answer, Alistair Finch appeared, striding out of the elevator with a smug look on his face. He had likely come down to savor his victory, to watch her being unceremoniously ejected. When he saw the stranger confronting his fired nurse, his expression soured. "Excuse me," Finch said, stepping between them. "I am Alistair Finch, the CEO of this hospital. This employee has just been terminated for cause. Security is handling it." He gestured dismissively at Lena. The man in the suit did not even glance at Finch. His eyes remained locked on Lena. "I will ask you one more time," he said, his voice dropping even lower, colder. "Report." It was an order she was hardwired to obey. "Lena Petrova," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Nurse, RN, formerly Captain, United States Air Force, Pararescue, Unit 720th Special Tactics Group." The silence that followed was absolute. Dave, the security guard's jaw went slack. Alistair Finch's smug expression dissolved into one of stunned confusion. A pararescue jumper? A captain? He looked at the quiet, timid-looking rookie nurse as if seeing her for the first time. The man in the suit gave a single, sharp nod. The last piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. "Captain Petrova," he said, the title a mark of profound respect. "I am General Marcus Thorne. Arthur Henderson, the man whose life you just saved, is a dear friend of mine. He is also the Deputy Secretary of Defense." Finch's face went white. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like a marble statue. Deputy Secretary of Defense. The words echoed in the suddenly cavernous hallway. General Thorne turned his head, finally acknowledging the CEO's existence. He looked Finch up and down, his gray eyes filled with a chilling contempt. It was the look a man gives an insect he is about to crush. "You," Thorne said, the single word a judgment. "You fired the person who saved the Deputy Secretary's life. You are relieved of your command, Mr. Finch. Consider this your termination." Finch sputtered, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. You can't. You have no authority here. This is my hospital." "It is a hospital, not a hedge fund," Thorne countered, his voice like chipping granite. "And it is about to come under the most intense scrutiny you can possibly imagine." He turned to Dave, who was standing frozen, looking utterly terrified. "Guard, secure this man's office. Do not let him or anyone else enter or remove anything. Is that understood?" Dave, a man used to taking orders from Finch, looked at the CEO's pale, trembling face, then at the general's iron gaze. He made his choice. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice firm. "Understood." Thorne then turned back to Lena. The hardness in his face softened, almost imperceptibly. "Captain," he said, his voice now quiet, for her ears alone, "walk with me. Give me a full after-action report. Start from the beginning. Omit nothing." "Yes, General," Lena replied. She fell into step beside him, leaving a spluttering, apoplectic Alistair Finch frozen in the hallway, his authority stripped from him in less than a minute. As they walked, the general pulled out his phone again. He didn't speak for a moment, simply scrolling through his contacts. He found the one he wanted and pressed the call button. "This is Thorne," he said into the phone, his voice clipped and precise. There was no preamble. "I have a priority directive. I need a full-spectrum forensic audit initiated on a civilian institution, St. Jude's General Hospital. Focus on the Chief Executive Officer, Alistair Finch. I want everything: financials, procurement contracts, personnel files, performance reviews, maintenance logs. I suspect criminal negligence and fiscal malfeasance. The authorization code is Tango Alpha 9 or 7. Expedite." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Correct. Full federal jurisdiction. I also need you to flag an asset. Name is Petrova, Lena. Petrova. She is a former USAF captain. PJ, highly decorated. Mark her file as a protected resource under my direct authority. She is not to be subject to any adverse local administrative or legal action. Acknowledge. He listened again, his face impassive. Good. I expect a preliminary report on my desk in 12 hours. He ended the call. The Pentagon had been called. The gears of a machine far more powerful than Alistair Finch could comprehend were now turning, grinding inexorably toward him. Lena listened to the entire conversation, her expression unreadable. Inside, a dam of emotion she had held back for 2 years was beginning to crack. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was a cold professional fury, the same fury she felt when a mission was compromised by incompetence. Finch hadn't just tried to ruin her life. He had actively created an environment where patients were destined to die. His corruption wasn't just a matter of numbers on a page. It was a weapon pointed at the heart of every sick person who came through the hospital doors. Now, Captain, Thorne said, bringing her back to the present. Your report. Let's start with the defibrillator. Lena began to speak, her voice low and even. She recounted every detail of the code blue, the missing epinephrine, the faulty battery, the cheap IV solution she had been forced to modify. She spoke in the language they both understood, the cold, hard language of facts, of cause and effect, of failure points and operational deficiencies. It was not a complaint. It was a damage assessment. As she spoke, Thorne's expression grew more and more grim. He wasn't just listening to the story of how his friend was saved. He was hearing a detailed intelligence brief on an institution in a state of systemic collapse, rotted from the head down. They reached the ICU waiting area, a small, quiet space with uncomfortable chairs. Thorne gestured for her to sit. He remained standing, a sentinel watching over the room where his friend lay recovering. The precordial thump, he said after she finished. A bold move, high risk, high reward. It's not something they teach in nursing school. No, sir, Lena said. They taught it to us at Lackland, for situations where technology fails and you have nothing left but your hands. And your nerve, Thorne added quietly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the timid rookie nurse, but the woman who had earned the maroon beret. He saw the operator who had performed field surgery under fire, the medic who could set a bone in the dark, the soldier who ran toward the sound of the guns. It seems you haven't lost either. I tried to, Lena admitted, the words barely a whisper. I tried to leave it all behind. Some things can't be left behind, Captain, Thorne said gently. They become a part of who you are, the part that doesn't let a man die just because a machine is broken. The next few hours were a blur of controlled, efficient activity. Just as Thorne had commanded, a team of quiet, serious-looking men and women in dark suits arrived. They weren't police. They were federal investigators from the Department of Health and Human Services, accompanied by forensic accountants. They moved with a quiet purpose that brooked no argument, heading straight for the executive suite. Finch, who had been ranting in the hallway for 10 minutes before being confined to a small waiting room by a now resolute Dave, was formally served with a federal warrant. His blustering turned to ash in his mouth. The arrogant, untouchable CEO was suddenly a small, frightened man in an expensive suit, stripped of all his power. Word spread through the hospital like wildfire. An underground railroad of courage began to form. Nurses and doctors who had been too afraid to speak up for months began to talk. The charge nurse from Lena's floor provided a detailed statement about the chronic supply shortages. A maintenance worker produced records showing that his requests for a new defibrillator battery had been denied 3 times, citing budget constraints. A pharmacist came forward with purchasing orders signed by Finch, specifically mandating the switch to cheaper, less effective medications from a supplier with whom Finch, it would later be discovered, had a personal financial stake. The evidence mounted, an avalanche of truth burying Alistair Finch and his corrupt administration. Lena watched it all from a distance, sitting in the quiet waiting room with General Thorne. He had procured a cup of coffee for her. It was hot and strong. She held it in her hands, the warmth a small anchor in the storm. She felt nothing, a strange, hollowed-out calm. The vindication was happening, but it felt like it was happening to someone else. If you were Lena, would you have boarded that plane to a new life? Or would you risk everything to save a stranger? She had risked everything, and now the consequences were unfolding, but the future was a blank page. What came next? Would she still have a job? Would she want one in this place that was so broken? Late in the afternoon, a group of people approached the waiting area. It was the hospital's board of directors, their faces a mixture of grim apology and raw panic. They were led by the chairman, a silver-haired man named Mr. Davies. "General Thorne," Davies began, his voice strained. "On behalf of the board, we offer our most profound apologies. We were unaware of the extent of Mr. Finch's mismanagement." Thorne looked at him, his expression unyielding. "Your job is to be aware. You failed." Davies flinched, but nodded. "Yes, we did, and we intend to rectify it." He then turned to Lena, his expression softening into one of deep respect and contrition. "Miss Petrova, Captain, what you did today was heroic. Firing you was an unforgivable error, and Mr. Finch did not have the authority to do so. Of course, your position is secure. We would be honored if you would stay." Lena looked at him, then at the faces of the other board members. She saw fear in their eyes. Fear of lawsuits, of scandal, of the powerful man standing beside her. Their offer wasn't born of morality. It was born of damage control. "I don't think," Thorne said, his voice cutting in, "that you understand the asset you have here." He took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Lena, a human shield made of silence and authority. "Captain Petrova is one of the most highly trained combat medics this country has ever produced. She has operated in the most austere and dangerous environments on the planet. Her skills in triage, emergency response, and crisis management are unparalleled." He let that sink in. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "You don't just offer her her old job back," Thorne continued, his voice cold and hard. "You get on your knees and you thank God she was here today. And then you create a new position for her, Director of Emergency Preparedness and Response. You give her full authority to overhaul your protocols, your inventory, your training. You give her the budget she needs to fix the mess that you and Finch created. You give her the power to ensure that what happened to Arthur Henderson never, ever happens again." He paused, his gaze sweeping over each board member. "And you will pay her double what you paid Finch, because unlike him, she's actually worth it." The audacity of the demand left the board speechless. Davies opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Thorne's unblinking stare, then at Lena's quiet, composed form. He saw the truth. They were broken, and she was the one person who could fix them. "Yes," Davies said finally, his voice hoarse. "Of course, whatever she needs." Thorne gave a curt nod, then looked at Lena. The decision was hers. He had cleared the field for her, but she had to be the one to take the ground. Lena stood up. She looked at the board members, her gaze steady. She was no longer the timid rookie. She was no longer hiding. The camouflage was gone. They were finally seeing the person who had been there all along. "I accept the position," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a newfound authority. "My first directive will be a full, top-to-bottom audit of all life-saving equipment and pharmaceutical supplies. A report will be on your desks by Monday. My second directive will be mandatory, recurring emergency response drills for all clinical staff. We start tomorrow." She wasn't asking, she was telling. The board chairman could only nod. "Yes, of course, Director." The new title hung in the air, solid and real. Director Petrova. Later, as the federal investigators led a handcuffed, utterly broken Alistair Finch out of the hospital's main entrance, past the portrait of his own smiling face, Lena stood by the window in her new temporary office, Finch's old office. She watched the flashing lights of the police cars paint the evening sky. General Thorne stood beside her. The hospital was now secure. His friend was stable and recovering, and justice was being served. "They need you, Captain," he said quietly, using her old rank one last time, a private acknowledgement between two soldiers. "I know, General," she replied, her eyes on the chaotic scene below. "That's why I stayed." "The military's loss is their gain," he said. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a brief, firm gesture of support. "If you need anything, anything at all, you have my number." "Thank you, Marcus," she said, using his first name for the first time. He nodded, then turned and left, his duty done. Lena remained at the window, looking out not at the city, but down at the emergency room entrance below. A new ambulance was pulling in, its lights flashing. A new crisis, a new patient, a new chance to make a difference. The air in the office no longer smelled of leather and greed. Through the vents, she could just make out the faint, familiar scent of bleach and antiseptic from the floors below. It no longer smelled like a place to hide. It smelled like home. She was not a hero. She was not a witness. She was a guardian, and her watch had just begun. The quiet, exhausted relief finally came, washing over her in a gentle wave. She had won. If you're still with me, I want to say thank you. It's your support, your time, and your attention that allow us to keep telling stories like this. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's the single best way to ensure you never miss a new story. We all know what it feels like to be underestimated. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you got to prove someone wrong in a big way? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't go anywhere. The next story is for anyone who's ever been told they weren't good enough. It's loaded up and ready to play for you right now.